Mike, thanks for joining us on this episode of Unpolished Gems. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here.
Dad, maybe you can frame this one with a little bit of context on how we ended up here and got Mike on the show.
Sure. So I've kind of gone back and forth with Mike over the years, and I've actually engaged Mike on a business level multiple times. And the reason I originally connected with Mike is the original offer that I was looking for is I was looking for salespeople for one of my offers. And that's one of Mike's main areas of expertise. And he did a great job with that. And then later on, I had an interest in, I said, Mike, I've got this other offer, but it'd be so nice to not have to do, manage a whole team of salespeople. Do you have anything related to like doing group sales in a virtual format? And he had a coaching group for doing that. So Mike's been kind of like a combination of somebody who's helped me place people onto offers, as well as almost like a coach and mentor in the area of like marketing, particularly digital marketing, lead gen, and conversion into what would be referred to as high ticket sales. So with that being said, a lot of people may not even have any idea about half the things I just said. So Mike, maybe you could give a little background into what I mean by high ticket sales and how you got involved in this weird space.
Yeah, so high ticket sales is a term that people oftentimes use when they're discussing selling like a $3,000 to about a $50,000 product. So it particularly describes more like a type of deal velocity. So usually these are like one or two call sales. They're usually like a 30 to 60, upwards of 90-day deal cycle. So they're like a little bit faster. And it has like a very similar sales style to stuff like car sales or insurance sales or vacation sales, stuff like that. And so that's kind of when people talk about high ticket sales, and a lot of what happens is you get this like collection of really smart people, which is what I like about it. Because like we team up a lot of times with experts. So, you mentioned, Tim Larkin, and Tim Larkin's like one of those like weirdly smart guys who, like, if you guys know who Tim is, he just studies violence and like how to perpetrate violence at the highest level in order to teach it to first responders and people who need self-defense. And so you get to work on all these accounts and be with these just like super smart people. And a lot of times they're packaging their expertise and selling it in like seminars and workshops and things like that. And so that's kind of a lot of times when people say high ticket sales, that's the world that we're talking about.
So, Mike, maybe we can kind of go backwards for a second and talk a little bit about like, how did you go down the pathway of getting involved in business? And I'd actually like to go one step further, which is like, did you go to college and which college did you attend? And do you believe in the value of a college education?
Okay, so I went to Boston University. I graduated. I tried to drop out, but my dad gave me some dad wisdom when I did, and so I stuck it out and I made it out. I did college in 3 years. I really, this is crazy to say, but college is one of my biggest regrets in life. I really wish that I had gone straight into the sport. Like, I love the game of business, and I felt like school did a poor job of preparing me for how it went, and I felt like my instincts were more tuned to business anyway than it was to school in the first place. And like, to give you an example, my business strategy professor never had a fucking job in her life. Like, the only job she had was in academia. So she went from bachelor's to master's to doctorate to teaching me business strategy.
Yeah.
Which, like, she had never even worked in a company, nonetheless run a company. So, like, it was all theory, all paper-based. My marketing professor threw me out of the class, said I didn't know what I was talking about. When he asked, like, how would you know this is going to work? And I was like, you don't. You just got to rapid test it with an MVP. And he's like, that's not how this would go. You do focus groups. And I'm like, no, you don't, dude. That's not how this works. And the reality was, like, I had actually had an LLC at that time. I had a company. I was marketing a product. I did what every college kid does, which is start a t-shirt company in college. And then I feel like it's like a entrepreneurial rite of passage. You got to do that one. And then I did that. throughout that whole time frame, I was just like, I don't want to be here. We called it simulation world, right? Because it's like everything's simulated, and it works so different than real world, where like the real world, it's open book, but you don't know what the questions are going to be on the test. In this world, it's closed book, but they tell you what's going to be on the test. Like completely opposite to how this thing functions. And so I really do regret going to college. For the most part, I wish I had just gone straight into the game, and I've like mentored a lot of young guys who did go straight into the game, and they're where I was like 4 or 5 years later.
Do you see any value outside of, if let's say you're not one of the 5 to 10 percenters, and maybe that's too big a group of people who see themselves being entrepreneurial and starting businesses and raising capital? Do you see a value in a college education if you're not going to start a business right after?
Not much, to be honest. There's a small value in a liberal arts oriented style of thinking, which like I kind of take a liberal arts approach to study anyway, right? So I just follow my curiosity and I'll study anything, and I'll read about the ant colonies one day, and then I'll be reading about, coding the next day, and then poker the following day. And I can find the ideas and pull them into what I'm doing. And so I've always had that a little bit. And some of those, there are some mental models that I got from exposure to more of the liberal arts parts of my college education than the actual business part. The other thing that did happen, but I don't know if it's that big of a leg up, was college did teach me how to read financial statements better than I knew how to read financial statements. But it didn't give you like real managerial accounting that was practical for small businesses. It was managerial accounting for if you worked at Bain and you're underwriting companies and stuff. So it wasn't as powerful, but there were like a couple ideas that maybe I got. But by and large, I would say I would just go straight into the game.
Did you find value in the life side of college? So outside, like I found not like I think I found some value in the classroom, but I feel like a predominant amount was people I met, going to being on a campus, doing the social side of college for a couple years and maturing on that end. Did you find value in that?
Not really, to be honest. I think when I was graduating college, I would have thought it was valuable, but now with like a decade of hindsight, I can see how those relationships didn't really contribute much to what I'm doing today at all. Like I've a lot of those guys are friends and stuff, and I'll talk to them, but like it didn't contribute any like iota to the success that I have.
I am curious, the guys that you're referring to, where did most of the people that you went to BU with end up, however many years later?
Like a lot of my good friends were engineers, which that makes sense, like to be in Boston and to be in engineering. And if you are more employee minded, like a lot of those guys are doing cool stuff with like Genentech and robotics companies and things like that, but they weren't entrepreneurial. The vast majority of people that graduated from our program at BU end up getting kind of put into a managerial feeder system in some sort of a big four company consulting, like, Bain, BCG, like those types of guys. What they're really doing is they're just designing like a cookie cutter model just to ship out to these types of consulting firms. And because if you look at it, like what's college optimizing for? They want to say, this percentage of people upon graduation had a job that was worth this amount or more. That's the biggest marketing claim that they can make, so that's what they push. So their whole thing is they need to align with these big companies that can pay a premium salary to someone that they've designed and basically molded to their liking. So I already knew I wasn't going that route, so I kind of was like a black sheep in the environment anyway. Like my interests at that time were more streetwear, hip hop, skateboarding, like that type of culture. I always knew that I wasn't meant to work for people. Like I was the type of kid when I was in first grade, the teacher asked me what I wanted to be. I said my own boss. Like I just knew from day one.
How did you know?
I was lucky. So I had super early exposure to entrepreneurship, and my dad is an entrepreneur, and my mom was working corporate. And I had a front row ticket to something amazing. So basically, I watched my dad take us from like lower middle class, where my mom was really the one paying the bills. He was the entrepreneur guy that like should really get a job, is what everybody was thinking, you know? And he had had some success before I was born, but then lost it all. And so he then lost it all, and for 7 years was like really just SOL, down on his luck, paying back everybody, and like spent 7 years just paying off debt. Then he ended up starting this company, and he started it like right when I was born almost. And from that point, he then took it and scaled it and sold it for $40 million. And he did that when I was 16 years old, was when he ended up selling it. And so my mom was working corporate, and I was a problem child. I was like, my favorite shows were like Dennis the Menace and Problem Child. Like that's the type of kid I was. And so she couldn't take me to work, and so my dad would take me with him all the time, just out to work. And so we'd be going and doing deals. I'd be looking at factories and machines, and he'd be showing me designs and packaging and materials and explaining how he's reducing time and automations to get profit margins. And he would just show me the whole thing. He would take me out on meetings, and he would ask me, you know, hey, what do you feel about that person? Did you like what they said? What's your perspective on this? And he involved me a lot in it too, like almost like I was an adult. And in fact, he would even execute ideas that I would give him, and he'd take them and implement them, because he was just open-minded, and he didn't discriminate. He knows a good idea is a good idea. Who it comes from didn't matter to him. And so I just had that front row ticket, and that kind of like was the thing that set in my brain, like I need to be my own boss.
The thing I wanted to go from there with is when you were coming through high school, like what was the first age where you took the step on, I'm doing this on my own? Like you had the t-shirt business in college. Was that your first entrepreneurial thing? And then what was that period? Like I just graduated college 2 weeks ago, and it's that same thing of like, at what stage did you make the decision that this is what I'm doing? And what was that thing you leaned into right out of school?
What happened for me was I always knew that I didn't want my dad's business. So like I would be like 6, and I'd remember guys be like, "Hey, little man, so you're gonna take over daddy's company one day?" And I'd be like, "Nah, I'm starting my own." Like I just knew that from that age. So I already knew that like whatever I wanted to do, I wanted to do. Then it was whatever my passion was, I would then look at the business of that thing. So like I was super into skateboarding, and when I was 10, that was all I did was skateboard all day from sun up to sundown basically. And then I would just be looking at the business of skateboarding and like wanting to be like Tony Hawk or something like that, where I had a big skateboard business and stuff. And then I got into paintballing, and then it was like the paintball business. I want to have a paintball business. And like I started trying to make headbands for the paintball business, and I got a sewing machine and tried to hustle those and stuff like that. Like, so there was always like whatever I was doing, I was trying to create a business around it, but I was a little bit too like pie in the sky, big idea, not a lot of implementation. As soon as it gets hard, I give up or shift to the next thing. And like I just kept not getting any traction on any ideas, and I would talk about these ideas a lot, and I had a lot of good ideas, but I didn't have a lot of results. And there came a point where I was in college, and I remember someone was talking about me at one point, and I was like, a friend told me that everyone said Mike Mark's full of half-baked ideas. And it was like one of my best friends told me this. He's like, yeah, this is what people are saying about you. And it was like, damn, like that hurt really bad. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where you're like almost mad at the messenger, but you know that he's telling you from a place of love. So you're just like confused and need to like process that information. So that was what had happened. And then I realized like, I just need to start an LLC. Like if I alone do that, like then I'm starting to make it work, and I'm like actually taking action. So then I just started an LLC, and I got like a little bit of capital, and I put together the shirts, and I started working on it, and I started to like do that. And that was really in my sophomore year in college, because I thought to myself when I was in college, I was like, I have the protection blanket of college. And like I had always looked up to entrepreneurs who had started their business in college too, you know, like Echo's a good example, or Zuckerberg's another common example where you see these guys that are starting their businesses in their dorm rooms.
So, Mike, where did that lead you, and how did you end up making the leap to timeshares, which I believe was the background that led to the opening of sales?
So this is a great question. And what had happened was, so I tried to go home in my sophomore year spring break. And I told my dad on spring break, I said, Dad, school's not for me. I want to drop out. Like, can I take whatever my next 2 years of tuition and go start a company? And he said to me, don't create a habit of quitting. I was like, damn it. Like, that's just some dad wisdom. Like, you can't argue with that one. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just finish it. So I finished it a year early. And then I graduated. And at the point we go, it's my graduation. We're in Boston. We're in Brookline. There's a little barbecue joint. We're sitting outside. And then, of course, I didn't have a job, right? Everybody else has jobs at the investment banks. Oh, my son's going to this place. And, oh, yeah, he's working at Ernst & Young. And I'm just like, what's Michael doing? Like, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out, you know? And then my dad asked the dreaded question of, like, what are you going to do? And I'd been waiting for it because I had a whole, like, business plan and everything mapped out of what I wanted to do. So I'm like, okay, boom. And I start pitching. And I like just go for 10 minutes straight pitching him this idea of what I want to do and my vision and everything that is my goal. And then he just starts laughing when I'm done. And like I look up and I'm like, I don't get it. What's so funny? Like, haha, what? And he's like, I don't think you get it. You're cut off. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I mean, no money, honey. You are cut off. He's like, you got to figure it out from here. He's like, I'm done paying your bills. He's like, I foot the bills for long enough. So he's like, it's on you to figure this out. And whatever you want to do it, but you got to do it. And then, so at this point, I felt like he had just dumped a bucket of ice water on my head because I kind of grew up with a silver spoon, and my dad did the thing where he tried to like give his son everything he didn't have growing up. So it kind of enabled my brother and I to be a borderline helpless, right? And do the minimum and get by with it. And so I was sitting there like shocked. And then finally, I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? And he goes, okay, we got two options. You can get a job, or you can build a business, or you can get a job and build a business, or you can get a career. He said, if you get a job and you build a business, he's like, your job's not really going to get you where you want to go, but it will help potentially get you some skills, and then you build your business at night. He said, or you get a career where a career is going to really demand all of you. And eventually you may want to go start a business, but like a career would really like occupy and demand and push you at the level that you don't have much else to give. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get a job and build my business at night. And then he said, okay, well, if that's what you're going to do, you have to do 3 things. He said, if you do these 3 things, then you have the keys to the kingdom. I'm like, okay, so what are these 3 things? And he said, first, you need to learn how to serve. Right? You need to understand what people want, how to anticipate their wants and needs, and give them a great experience, like something that wows them. He said, second, you need to learn how to sell. Right? So once I've created that value, I want to be able to exchange that value and turn it into cash. And there's a fear and a certain pattern of these conversations that happens. You have to learn and master that conversation and that pattern in order to then transact. And then he said, third, you need to learn how to build systems. Right? So the whole thing has to be able to run without you. So if you can do those 3 things, then that's the keys to the kingdom. So I said, okay, I got it. And then that was my blueprint in what I call the School of Hard Knocks. So I applied to a coding boot camp called General Assembly. I'd gotten accepted. My parents were willing to pay for it. And I was like, okay, this might make sense for me. And then I had a conversation with my brother, and he was like, dude, I know you. Like, do you really see yourself looking at a computer all day, not talking to people? And I was like, well, you got a point, because I can't not talk. So I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you're right. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And then one day I was just scrolling on Facebook, and there was a post that said, I'm looking for a remote salesperson, or I'm looking for a salesperson. If you want the ability to work remotely and travel, then message me and let's talk. And so I messaged them, and then I got in contact with a company called Gun.io, And so what they were doing was they were connecting companies with developers. So they had like sort of a staff augmentation or sort of a software development matchmaking process. And I was like, okay, cool. I talked to him. Me and the founder hit it off. He had actually gone to BU, which was interesting. And we both love rap. So we were just like talking about rap music. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. We're buddies. Like, we're going to hit it off and we're going to do great. And I started taking calls, started closing them super easy. Like, they were just cakewalks, especially compared to timeshare. Because, I mean, timeshare is like one of those places. If you could sell timeshare, you like everything else is easy after that. So these are just super easy. And I'm just lining them up, locking them in. And he's like, you're the first person who's ever closed more than me. And I was like, in all honesty, I think this is too easy. I was like, can I play with the price? Because I think we're undercharging here. I was like, I'm like, dude, I'm used to doing 20, 40 grand deals. Like, I can push these numbers pretty heavy right now. And he's like, well, whatever you think you could do, why don't you do it? And so we got to the point where I was doing 120 grand deals in 15 minutes. And it's just because I understood the market and started to position us to more the higher end of the market and stop trying to serve the lower end of the market. And we actually just cut them out entirely. And through doing that, we went from 100 grand a year to $1 million a year in 3 months. And at that point, I was just like, what the hell is going on? And then that was when it was like, okay, this is going to be my obsession now.
So talk to me about what that looks like after you work with Gun.io. Like, did you launch your own offer? Did you work with some other firm first? Like, how did that transition take place?
Initially, I was with Gun.io. This is insane. So they paid me $2,000 a month flat retainer to do this. And so we went from 100 grand a year to 2 million a year. And I was like just stoked. I was talking to this guy who he's a photographer in Orlando, and he does like a lot of high-end photography stuff. He's like in his 50s, and he's just a little bit smarter than I am and been around the block a few times, you know what I mean? And I was telling him about how excited I was because like these companies are growing so fast. I've never seen anything like this. This is cool. Like, and I was just like, and at this time too, the first time, you don't know if it's real. Like, you don't know if you caused it. You don't know what caused it. You don't know if it's a flash in the pan. You got lucky, right place, right time. So like, I wasn't thinking like I'm the reason that this was happening. I'm like, I don't know, but this is awesome is what kind of my reaction to it. And I'm explaining it to him, and he's like, you're telling me you guys got it to 2 million a year and you didn't get any of the upside? I was like, oh shit. Like, I should have structured that deal differently, you know. But I didn't know any better because I was comparing it to the hotel where I was getting paid $2,500 for 40 hours a week plus an hour there and back, and just I hated it. So this was like relatively way better, but I didn't know any better. So at the initial time when I was doing the Gun.io thing, my thought process was like, if I just get 5 people to pay me $2 grand a month, then I'm going to make 10 grand a month, and then I'm going to be rich, and I'll be able to travel and do everything I want to do. That was kind of the level that I was playing on at that time. And so I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I get 5 people that I could do this for? And I'd get it up to like 3, maybe 4 at a time. And then I just everything starts breaking because it's just too hectic and stuff. And so I saw an ad that said like, hey, grow your agency. And I was like, I'm going to see what this is about. So I get on a call and I'm like talking to this guy and I'm explaining to him what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get these 5 people to pay me $2 grand a month. And then each one's taking me 10, 15 hours a week. So I could probably do about 4 accounts, 5 accounts. And he's like, hey, dude, I think your model's broken. Like, have you ever heard of high-ticket coaching and consulting? I was like, I mean, like, you can explain it. It kind of makes sense just hearing it. It made sense to me. Like, I got it because I had been in personal development enough. So I was like, but yeah, tell me. And he kind of explained a little bit more. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, like, why don't I try it? And then, like, he started trying to sell me on being his sales rep. And so I was like, okay, I'll try it with you. And so it kind of got me into a pocket of community. And basically, like, I started to get tapped into all the high-level Sam Ovens early mastermind clients. So, like, at this point, basically, it was Traffic and Funnels, Andrew Argued, Josh Harris. Like, and these guys were all the top 3 of Sam's program when Sam's program starting to smash. And then basically I got in and started to do all their sales behind the scene with all of them. And that was then like at this point in time, I'm kind of doing it myself, but I'm kind of like a hybrid, like an entrepreneur ish, where I would like kind of hang my hat, build the team under someone else's umbrella. And then after I did that a few times, then I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to do like my thing. And so then that was when we broke out and started like coaching sales as it is now.
Can you take a moment and then just I want to let you ask anything related to that? Like, so I'm very curious about lessons learned about like managing and recruiting and growing an offer with salespeople. Because to be honest, Mike, of all the things that you can do in business, and I've been in business now for close to 30 years, it may be one of the most challenging, the most like mentally frustrating and emotional roller coaster aspect of a business and managing that profile, because there's so much rejection, there's so much failure, and it takes a very special type of a person to be able to cope with not only doing it, but then you're like now recruiting and managing other human personalities and trying to scale on an offer. So can you start with just what did you learn about, persuasion, human nature, and managing teams? And then how did you approach going out and building your own offer for yourself, and scaling it? Like what can we like share with everyone listening about like the process of going from an entrepreneur to starting your own offer?
So first thing in terms of building and recruiting teams and training and all that stuff. So just to give you guys a little bit of context, the first sales rep when I was a first-time sales manager, the first sales rep that I ever hired, after about a month of working together, told me he was going to quit. And I was like, oh, dude, that sucks. So, like, are you going to get a job selling something else? And he's like, no, like, I'm going to quit sales. That's how bad of a manager I was. Like, this dude just goes like, I'm out of the profession at this point. So I like literally still have guilt feelings towards this because of just how poorly I managed that situation and that person. And it was not for lack of effort. In fact, it was the opposite. I had too much effort. And so like I would just overcoach and then coach some more. And so I was, I didn't want him to ever feel like he was not supported. So I was listening to all of his calls or listening to calls right away. And if he ever had questions, I was telling him exactly how to answer it. And I was being the expert. I wasn't helping him become the expert, because I was so busy showing him how I knew everything as opposed to getting him to show me that he knows what we're talking about. And so that was a major aha moment. So I realized like, oh, I'm throwing too much at this guy at one time. And so what I need to do is I need to take a look at what they need to learn, and I need to break it down into chunks. And so these are something that we call progressions. And so with progressions, it's just like a baby. Like if you watch a baby, they kind of learn how to sit up, holding on to something, then they learn how to sit up by themselves, then they can stand up hanging on to something, then they could stand without holding, and then they could kind of take steps, and then they could start to run. And so the skills are stacking in progressions that then allow them to then have mastery to attain the next one and then the next one. And so that was sort of what I had to figure out, was like, how do I break this process down into progressions? And then also, how do I 80-20 the process so that I'm teaching them the 20% that's going to get them the majority of the results and not much more than that? Because if I was doing much more, it was too much for their working memory, and then they would start to go into uncertainty and doubt, and they would sound doubtful, and there's basically no way you can kill a sale faster than sounding uncertain. So that was where I was like, okay, I just got to simplify till I got it done easy for people to get up and running, and that was a big part of it.
What was the component for you of like, whether it was as a manager in sales or when you've been in sales or when you've coached people on sales or seen it, are there 2 or 3 common either misconceptions you see that people way launch with that are way off, or mistakes that you made early on that might seem good in the short term but end up being devastating long term in sales?
Are you asking from the perspective of a salesperson or someone actively trying to sell something, or from the perspective of the manager?
I'd say both, but starting with from the actual sales process, from the salesperson, stuff that they're diving in thinking they're crushing it, but in reality, it's hurting them.
Generally, what's going to happen, the kind of most common things that occur for new reps that are the mistakes are what's called happy ears. So happy ears is when we confuse interest and desire. So a lot of people are taught to AIDA, like attention, interest, desire, action. And if you follow it, like it implies that I is a step towards desire. What I've found is that I is a substitute for desire. And it's not a step towards desire, it's a substitute for desire. I want desire, right? And desire looks crazy. Like if you've ever seen someone where they saw someone who's stunningly attractive and their face goes like, that's desire, right? So desire looks a little bit crazy and fervorish like this. Interest is like this. Like they'll look down their nose with a tilted head because they're like interested. And so what will happen is people will be listening to what the prospect's asking or what the prospect's saying, not how it's being said. So they're missing the tone and the cadence communication. And then as a result, they believe that they have someone who wants it, but they're really just interested in their being nice. And so this is like what you would call the friend zone of sales. So it's like, yeah, you know, I used to get this on timeshare when they'd be like, Mike is a great sales rep and we love him. It's not for us, but you've got a good sales rep right here. Like there's nothing that they could do that's worse to your manager than that. And they would do that. And that's the friend zone. So that's a really common mistake. The other big common mistake is they will put too many features into the product. So they think that by selling sort of a Leatherman toolkit that has all these awesome, or like a Swiss Army knife product, they think that by selling something like that, that they're adding value. And what happens is people will actually pay a lot more for acute, specific problem-solving tools. And so, like, where you'll see a good example of this is with the drug manufacturers like Tylenol. So they have Tylenol fever, and then they have Tylenol pain relief. It's the same fucking medicine. It just says for a different use case because they can mark it up a little bit extra and push more profit out of people who go, I have a fever, I need this one, right? And so that's a good micro example of that. But if I can get the product to focus on one problem and one desired outcome, it's far more valuable than if I show all the extra amazing things the product does.
The desire versus interest one I find interesting because it's always I've heard from friends on stuff, either when they're telling me stories on stuff they're selling or seeing in my own stuff. The difference between when you're walking somebody through it and they say, where do I put my card down and where do I sign up? Or that sounds really interesting. Let me get back to you. And interesting typically stays in a circle of you spend a lot of fucking time on it and it doesn't net you out anywhere.
Yep, that is it.
I thought it was kind of funny when we were on one of the calls recently, and you said that I know you're a married man with a beautiful child and another one on the way, but you said that you pick up a lot of amazing stuff from the pickup world and the dating world. What's the crossover there, and what's the insight that kind of like, you know, straddles both worlds in order to be successful in either, whether it's, you know, personal like relationships and dating or desire for a product or service?
Interestingly, like I almost don't even view them as separate, right? In my mind, it's the same thing because the process of seduction is the process of sales. And so it's identifying, being able to spot and identify desire, being able to magnify and enhance and channel that desire to a specific action or outcome, to then be able to make the person feel safe throughout the process, and then like just not pay attention or gradually like move the barriers that are and obstacles that are getting in your path, and you just keep moving towards specific outcome. And like it follows a very specific journey, and so there's something that we call the emotional journey of the sale. And this is a big part of like what we teach and when we're helping sales reps or business owners figure out how to master sales. This is sort of the meta concept that everything fits under, which is if you've ever read The Hero's Way by Joseph Campbell or The Hero with a Thousand Faces,
Yep.
it's about how effectively all the heroes are the same story, right? And if you guys have watched Spider-Man or you've watched Harry Potter or you've watched Star Wars, they're all the same movie, like beat by beat by beat. It's just different settings, different tools, different environments and characters, and that's really it. So with sales, it's the same thing. Everything we buy has the same emotional journey, and it's understanding that journey and what's happening inside of the human brain when we go on that journey. And once you understand that, you know how to design it. And so that's where like seduction and pickup artists are working at the same problem. They're trying to understand, how do I design this emotional journey that creates this experience that follows the same process though.
That makes perfect sense. And Mike, I wanted to ask, kind of tying back to the college versus no college thing, there's a lot of times you'll see people go back and forth on lifestyle business versus equity. And, raising capital and going big and selling for a massive multiple and focusing on that, not cash flow, for 5 to 10 years and doing multiple turns of that versus the person who's like, hey, I'm happy making a 7-figure income, working less than 10 hours a week and living the lifestyle that I want to lead. Can you give everyone an insight into like how much volume of sales you have personally been responsible for on an annual basis, so they understand the magnitude of how much revenue is being driven through all these different businesses? And what have you discovered? Because I'm assuming you work with SaaS companies and then these individual niche-based entrepreneurs. Who's happier? What's your take on that question? If you were going to give your child advice when they came out of college, which direction would you take them down?
So here's the reality: is nobody's happy. So as soon as you get that one out of the way, it's easy. So nobody's happy. They're all upset with their own situation, right? They're all, because the grass is definitely greener on the other side of the fence. So my answer is do both. I believe in doing both, and I encourage entrepreneurs to do both. If I mean a lifestyle entrepreneur, I want to encourage them to start looking at exits and start considering exits. If I meet guys who are considering and they're just scaling and they're focused on an exit, I encourage them to have some sort of lifestyle income as well, right? And so what I tend to believe is that the lifestyle income part kind of frees you up to having fun with the exits. But when everything's riding on the exit, it stops being fun and you make dumb decisions because you get panicky if you're about to lose everything you have. Mm-hmm. Versus if you're like, worst push come to shove, I'll still make $500,000 this year and I'm fine. Like I'll pay my bills, right? So when you have that, you can just take way better bets and place bigger bets and hold your bets longer and just make smarter decisions overall. So I encourage most people just to do both. One thing I think that trips people up when they try to do this is, in fact, I was just in San Antonio this last week, and I was doing a training at an event for lawyers. And so these guys all have law firms. Some of them are doing multiple 7 figures. Some of them are just at 6 figures, trying to figure it out. And lawyers have a very similar problem to gurus, which is that their name is the one that's on the building, right? So when people pick up the phone, they want to talk to, John Morgan when they call the attorney. And so for them, they get hung up on this of like, they are their business because it's their name on the placard out there. And what I encourage most people to have is have a business that you never sell, right? And so this business that you never sell, and this is a business that you never partner anyone in on ever, right? So this business is you. And this is the Jay-Z, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. Like, this is that business, and this business is you. Never sell this thing. Keep that thing, and then you spin off the entities within that, and you can flip those out. And once you start to decouple those things, then a lot of times people won't sell their business because everything they have is wrapped up in that business. As soon as that business goes away, they don't know what happens to them after that. And so it's a terrifying thing. So hang on to it until the business stops performing, and then they don't have any value in the asset at the end of the day. So what I recommend to most people is have your lifestyle cash flow thing, have that feeding into your main business, but then take your skill sets, take your assets, take your networks, find ways you can combine things on basically low risk or hedged risk, long odds bets, right? I want to have a lot of long odds bets.
Can you give a couple of examples of how that plays out in your own business and life?
For me, basically what happens is I have coaching sales, which is I don't intend to sell that. And really, coaching sales is actually owned by another entity. So coaching sales is owned by Moment, right? Which is Make Our Mark Enterprises, which is me. Like, this is my company. And so that company owns coaching sales. Coaching sales, though, I don't really intend to sell coaching sales because it's a feeder for me for deals. Because people come to me and go, I need a sales rep, and I could say, hey, well, why don't we just partner together, and then I'll take equity in your company and scale it. And they go, well, that sounds like a good idea. And so I can get acquisitions, and I can do all kinds of deals with that. So that's what I do with it. And then, so for example, I just acquired in April 50% of a data science boot camp. No money down acquisition, came because I have this other entity. I have a lot of things and assets that I could port over into it. And then my goal on that is $100 to $250 million exit, right? So this is a long odds bet. I don't have a lot of risk involved in it. I didn't put a lot of cash. I don't have a lot in it. Super long odds bet, but all the math works out. Like, all the exits are there. The target buyers are there. Like, did all that stuff, and everything's lining up on the system. So that's kind of a good example of, like, coaching sales is there as my thing that's more giving me the cash flow and the lifestyle aspect, attracting those deals, and then those deals are where I'm setting up the longer plays.
Let's use an example of like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan. Do you look at like someone who creates a platform, podcasting, right? And that platform provides, just a slipstream of opportunity that comes through. I assume Ferris gets to invest because of this and it is an attractor to those types of things. Maybe he's doing affiliate and sponsorship deals. Is that what you're referring to, where I'm a business man?
In a lot of ways, yeah. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, like, I'm biased on digital assets, right? And so I personally believe, like, digital assets are where the real value is today. I believe that a YouTube channel is insanely valuable. Especially, you get a YouTube channel with great traffic and a strong keyword, you're going to print money. You get a one-word Instagram account on a banger keyword, you're going to print money. Like, digital assets are inherently super valuable, and I tend to believe that they're easier to manage, more efficient, and better. I bias towards them by and large. And so with that, for basically anybody, if you look at really like digital assets, content and code are the two best digital assets to own. Amazon, Elon, like, these are great examples of, like, they just own content and code. Joe Rogan, content. Tim Ferriss, content, right? And so you look at it, content and code are generally the most valuable digital assets that we can own. And then it's just having the right strategy. And I think that, like, anyone who's not actively making a lot of content is insane. Like, it's insane to live in this day and age and not make a lot of content. Because, first of all, it's super easy. Our phones have amazing cameras now. You could note take anywhere, you could dictate anywhere, you can take pictures of anything. And, like, people who are not actively taking notes, who are not actively creating content and who are not like cataloging their thinking and being creative with their thinking, it just doesn't make sense if you actually look at where the world's going.
So, Mike, if you were to start from scratch, literal scratch, but knowing everything that you know from all of your previous experience, and you wanted to create the ideal revenue stream slash model in today's world going forward that threw off unlimited amounts of revenue, required the minimal number of staff and moving parts, it was simple. What would that look like, or what would that be if you had a magic wand and it's like, this is the business this is a platform or business I would build in today's world?
You're thinking if I had nothing, I'm starting from scratch.
I'm saying you just sold out of everything that you got, and you have all the knowledge that you've accumulated till this age, and you had nothing encumbering you at all, and you could just take all that wisdom and say, I'd love to be a version of Mr. Beast in this area, or whatever, Jay-Z. I mean, I don't know what floats your boat, but I'm just curious, if you were to, again, sky's the limit, where would you plant your flag?
This is a really tough question, actually. I would just say content, just as much content as humanly possible. And then what I would do is I would pick a big total addressable market early. And that would be probably the two big things. But the form of content doesn't even matter anymore. At the end of the day, the content is inherently insanely valuable. People say, oh, you don't make money on music, or you don't make money in TV, or you don't make money in movies. And it's like, well, I've talked to dudes who have made like Let Me Buy You a Drink by T-Pain, and they still get $20,000 checks in the mail from licensing all day long. Like, you can make a lot of money on music if you understand how to move that asset. Or Scripps will sign off for $500,000, $1 million all day long, especially if you get back-end royalties on it, if you understand how to move that market. But those assets of content itself is, to me, where the true value is. And so I would just look to figure out how to acquire or create as much intellectual property as I possibly can. That would probably be the biggest thing. And then the challenge, though, is sometimes the acquiring assets versus managing assets is a challenge in and of itself, because sometimes you could acquire a lot of assets and poorly manage them, which is not as good as having less assets that are well managed. So, but I would say like intellectual property assets, and then manage the crap out of them.
And would that be your feedback for kids, high school, college, in that whole age bucket? Just find your thing and start pumping it?
Dude, any account, like I've bought Instagram accounts I bought a $25,000 Instagram account for $700. Dude, that would shave 3 years off of, or I mean, a year off of someone's life of just like auto doing that. And then now you have a big enough account that if you're a good, like smart young kid, you can figure that out, how to scale that account. And like stuff like that, like media properties and intellectual properties would be primarily what I'd be looking at. And things that were in, YouTube, podcasts, email lists, SMS lists, customer lists, any sort of things that are licensable, copyrights.
What do you think of Facebook groups?
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. It's one of the better traffic channels right now, period. So yeah, if you could find a Facebook group that has your ideal people in it, like that's what I would look at, is how do I get control over media assets and intellectual property assets? And then just really understand how to work those assets now.
That totally makes sense. And I think that's an interesting portion of, that's definitely not something you're really learning in school today, is building that brand and doing that stuff. And I've seen friends print 10x or 20x what they would be doing in certain jobs just from having that base. And even if it's not associated with their name, especially if it's not associated with their name, having some of those properties and being able to flip those, build those out and sell them.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. And then what you can do when you do have a big one too is it's just, there's so much leverage in them. Like even we don't have that big of properties. Like we have probably about 77,000 followers on Instagram across all the accounts that we own. But my wife and I, like I'm at 15,000 followers and she's at like 10 or just short of 10 now. And the amount of free stuff we get is pretty mind blowing. Like she got last year about $30,000 of clothes just mailed to us. She didn't buy clothes last year.
It's pretty wild. But before we kind of wrap up, the one area which, I mean, there's so many permutations, Mike, being that I know you and I know how far out the content and wisdom actually goes and the tentacles to it. But what I think is very relevant right now in this moment is AI and ChatGPT. And I've been uber impressed with your early adoption of it in a very practical way. Could you, like, just like we talked about acquiring digital assets, like to me, that's a big idea. What's your insight about like capitalizing on ChatGPT and utilizing it in a way that either allows you to monetize it or to allow it to be an efficient or effective way to like run your business, provide value to an existing business as a young person coming into it as a prompt engineer? What's your thoughts?
Okay, so I think there's a couple key parts to understanding ChatGPT and just AI in general and where the business opportunities are in it. So, one big part of it is the big business opportunity is not selling ChatGPT or a modified version of ChatGPT to companies. That's not a big opportunity. Like there's going to be a small, fast cash grab there, but that's not where the big money is going to be made. There's a really interesting article I read. I'd have to find it, but there's a VC who she was a partner at Greylock and specifically ran the AI VC fund. And she'd been doing this for over 7 years. So she's not like, ChatGPT, yeah. She's like as nerdy on AI as you can get and has been. And now it's like, oh, finally the time's coming. But one of the things she said in it was that the real opportunity is not in building on top of chat or on top of OpenAI's API. And I was actually doing something like that. And then I was like, and the whole time I was doing it, my question I kept asking myself was, how do I build a moat? How do I make it defensible? How do I build a moat? How do I make it defensible? How do I build a moat? How do I make it defensible? And I was trying to figure it out. And I was just like, I just couldn't see a way to making it defensible on a long-term position because I was well ahead of people, but I was like, I'm not going to build a business that's going to disappear in 6 months. Even if it makes a lot of cash, it's way too much effort to then end up with nothing at the end of it. So I was just like, I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to build it, I want to build it so there's like real value and exit potential at some point. So I kind of scrapped that, but where I see other people doing it is they're starting to build their own models on top of OpenAPI where it's their models are self-trained and feeding in very specific use cases. So like they might have a model for personal injury attorneys. And then anything about personal injury attorney case law, this model's been trained by some of the elite attorneys who have reviewed all this, and that's where the real like business opportunity for anyone that's trying to build like a big company. Those are where you get your $100 million, your exits with a B on them. Like that's where that opportunity is going to exist, is in more customized models that are specifically at this. My role in this is I figure you might as well sell some shovels, right? Which is why I'm doing the data science thing, because I could just throw data scientists at this problem. Then I have a huge asset that trains and builds the entry-level people that they need in order to run their AI training, so I could sell that to anyone who needs on-tap talent for that. So that's kind of like our end game.
Yep.
Is sell the shovels in this with it, but for the most part, I would say like that the big business opportunity is a self-trained model. Those are going to be expensive to be able to build. Just to give you guys context, one training session on OpenAPI costs $1.2 million. Granted, their models all of the internet forever, whereas if someone's model is a lot smaller, it can be relatively cheap to train it, and it's not that expensive. But it still takes development talent and skill and product skill and stuff to be able to get there. But that's where the big opportunity is for anyone who's going to tap into that. And then in terms of like how everyday business owners can leverage it, I think the biggest thing is you guys got to be able to teach it to write like you. If you, and this goes back to what I was talking about with the note-taking stuff, is like, I've been taking notes for 10 years in Evernote. I have 6,000 notes plus of all the things that interest me, of songs I've written, lyrics I like, of pictures of things that I think are cool, and books I wanted to save, and people I've met, and all kinds of stuff. I can put that into an internet brain that lives forever. And it's going to know all my writings. It's going to know everything I've thought. I can upload all my journal entries into it. And this thing can think and write and act like me.
Have you done this?
Yes.
And has it thought and written just like you?
Really freaking good. I've sent people the writing and they thought that it was me.
That's pretty amazing. So how would you recommend like your average person who has, let's say, written a lot of content to do what you just talked about so that it can create emails on your behalf? It can do speeches on your behalf.
For a regular person, what you want to do is you want to create what I call a master prompt. And so a master prompt is like a prompt that you would use that then teaches your voice and can get it to write in your voice. So what I did was I fed it my content, and then I told it to describe this writing style. So it would go through my content, and then it would tell me how it perceived the writing style. And I did that with a bunch of my content, and then I took all the best kind of parts of its descriptions, and then I created a new description that was a combination of its best descriptions. So basically, the AI told me what it thought the content was, and now I can tell the AI in its own words, this is how I want you to write. And so then I took that, and then I say, I want you to write as Mike Mark. Here's his writing style. Here's the books that have influenced him. Here's the music he likes. Here's the comedians he likes. These are the podcasts he likes. This is how, you can even say this is how his politics go. This is the religious stories that he's interested in. These are, and so I just started to teach it like, this is what I'm interested in. These are the books I like. These are the things I think about. These are mental models that I consider all the time. And then I've kind of created this master prompt that if I put that in, it will write like me.
I mean, it's brilliant. In fact, it gives me 1,000 ideas for how you might be able to do that for a recently deceased family member. How you might be able to do that for celebrities so that you feel like you have a relationship with a celebrity by text or chat. And it is for all intents and purposes, or you want to be coached by Anthony Robbins, but Anthony Robbins is not affordable. Maybe there's a version of that.
It's pretty wild. It's really wild. And like how good it can get at this point is mind blowing. And it's only going to keep getting better. But there's like, if you guys look at where this thing is going, there's no way it doesn't go to brain implants. Because the thing is that the rate of information, it doubles faster and faster and faster and faster. And we're getting to the point that the rate of information is going to be too fast for the human mind to keep up. It's going to be an actual physical impossibility. And so once that happens, we have to have a chip in our brain. It's the only way that as a species, we're going to be able to keep up with the information and be even remotely competitive against the AI. And so like, we're moving towards becoming bionic at the rate that we're going. I think people don't realize how fast we're probably going to be there. And that's why, like, the thing, if I can encourage anyone that's listening to this, I want to encourage you guys to just document your thinking as much as you possibly can, because we might actually have the ability to install our brains into like hardware technology and software as well and be uploaded in the cloud and like legit almost live forever. Like that's kind of insane, but we're like probably in our lifetime, it's really possible that our minds can be uploaded into a cloud and live for 500 years.
What's your timeline bet on brain implants, Mike?
I don't know. The interesting part's going to be the regulation of it. Right. And then the first use case of like whoever's going to do it and what's going to happen. The regulation is going to be the part, though, that's going to get it all jammed up, because it's like nobody wants to be able to control the entire nation of people. And so that's going to be the challenge. But I think what's going to happen is like we're not going to have a choice after a point, because the robots are going to be going so much faster than us.
Interesting. I think it's so cool to see. Just like I use it even now, as saying telling my dad, like when we get our clips back on episodes, I throw the transcription straight into ChatGPT. It's read all my old show notes from everything I've done for 6 years, knows how I write, knows my Instagram, gives me fucking better captions than I could write. And then I give it a little feedback. It learns. I keep one thread, so it learns every time. And then I don't change them anymore. Like it knows it. It writes better than I do. And then I put a tweak in, and it's like, well, based off of your prior stuff, here's an additional tweak you should make. I'm like, fuck, I didn't even think of that, but yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I think that I've been thinking about this a lot is I think there's a huge opportunity for creators, and just AI empowering creators. And like one of my predictions is that what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot more world builders, like so creators who build worlds, right? Like a J.K. Rowling or a George Lucas or like those types of people. If you look at like the highest expression of creativity, it is world building, which is why we see it and we're like, oh, Disney World is amazing, or like, oh, Harry Potter World is amazing, right? Like world building is the highest level of creativity, and I see that what AI is doing is it's making it way more possible now for everyday people to end up becoming world builders.
I think we got a whole part two of an episode in a couple months talking about that evolution of stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, Mike, where can people follow you, stay up to date with what you're up to, hear your thoughts on all of this? What's the best place?
If you Google me, Mike Mark, I'll probably pop up on everything. Facebook's usually the best place. Facebook, LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on those two platforms right now. And then also it's a good idea if you pop on our website and stuff, you could get on the email list, and I send a lot of emails out too. So
What percent of those are written by ChatGPT versus you?
most of them are still written by me, actually. I do a good amount with ChatGPT as like assisting, but I like to curate stuff at the end of the day.
Awesome. Mike, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mike. It was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.